professor of constitutional law at American University's law school for over 25 years. And while there, he was instrumental in setting up a program that sent young law students out into public high schools to teach about constitutional law and democracy. That was the Marshall
Brennan program.
Marshall Brennan program, and he worked with the families of Thurgood Marshall and Walter Brennan to set that up. He was elected in 2006 by a landslide to the Maryland legislature, where he served 3 terms and was very active on a variety of liberal causes there, notably sponsoring legislation that legalized same-sex marriage, withdrew the death penalty in Maryland, and also he helped establish something called a benefit corporation. Do people know what a benefit corporation is? It's a corporation that, by law, includes impacts on society, workers, the environment, and the community as part of their legally defined goals. First, it was established in Maryland. Now 33 states and at least 2 countries overseas are following that model. After that, he was elected in this last election to become our representative in Congress, where he started with his very first act was a resolution not to certify the results of the election because of Russian interference and voter suppression efforts. He's also taken an interest there in many liberal causes, as well as issues like the emoluments legislation and the 25th Amendment. It's a difficult political climate, but we couldn't have a better time to have someone like Jamie Raskin speak to us today when President Bush and President Obama just last week came out and talked about the corrosive effects of the state of our public discourse today. And that's the topic today, discourse in America, what's happening to our public discourse. And the term civil discourse, what does it mean? In a country where President Bush, I believe, talked about the casual cruelty that's degrading our discourse, and we're dehumanizing and demonizing opponents, people who hold different views. And this in a country that's built on the notion of compromise, that's built on the notion of competition of ideas to find the best solution for the community and society. Personally, after hearing those 2 presidents speak, I'm very eager to hear Jamie tell us what are the long-term effects we're looking at on our institutions and our public life from this degrading of our civil discourse. But there are many other things I know he would like to talk about too. So with that, I'll turn it over to you and say thank you so very much for giving us this opportunity today.
Well, thank you, Ann. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I appreciate, is the sound okay? It's all right. I appreciate so much the invitation. I appreciate that beautiful introduction, and I thank you all for joining us for this conversation, which I've been looking forward to all week. These have been some tough weeks, so I need things to look forward to, and this is one of them. I talked to my daughter last night. Our youngest daughter is over in Amsterdam. She's spending her junior year abroad there. And she said, Dad, everybody has health care here in the Netherlands. And they're not beating up immigrants, and it's not a hateful environment. And she said, I really like it over here. And I stopped her right there. I said, well, first of all, you left us an 85-pound Siberian husky, okay, that we're taking care of, so keep that in mind. And secondly, America needs you. We need you to come back. And I don't want the young people moving to the Netherlands and Canada and leaving. We need them right here. So then Tabitha said, well, what can we do? Like people don't even like our generation. They say we're snowflakes, we're too tender, we're too delicate. And then, so I started thinking, and I told her about what happened in Charlottesville, which is the ultimate collapse in civility and civil discourse and community. And to me, the absolute expression of identity politics run amok. The original identity politics in America, of course, being white supremacy. And I said, Tabitha, here's the way I'm thinking about it. when the neo-Nazis showed up, they had a permit to do their march on Saturday, but they had no permit on Friday. They just went on the UVA campus unannounced, unexpected, okay? And you remember it was in August, and the students hadn't gotten back to school yet, but there was an orientation, a group of orientation leaders who were there. So there were some college kids, they were juniors and seniors who were going to be leading the freshmen, and they were in the dorms. And the Nazis started marching, and they look out their dorms, and it's late at night, and remember, it's a torch-led protest they've got. And the kids run outside in their pajamas, their sweatpants, right? They confront this mob of Klansmen and skinheads who've shown up, and they surround the statue of Thomas Jefferson to protect it. They link arms, right, as the neo-Nazis are marching. And so I remember watching it and constructing a dialogue in my head of what was this kind of theater about. And I imagine the Nazis saying, Thomas Jefferson was a slave master, and he'd be on our side today in wanting to take back America for racism and for white supremacy. And I imagine the young people who were braving this mob saying, well, we know that Jefferson was a slave master, and Jefferson knew he was a slave master, and Jefferson knew it was wrong. He said, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just. And he repeatedly predicted that slavery would have to end in the United States. It's true he didn't divest himself, he didn't free his slaves, but he knew it was wrong. And most importantly, he put in the Constitution and he put in the Declaration of Independence the words that would come to guide the development of our country, that all men are created equal, that everyone has a right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that government is erected only legitimately on the consent of the governed, of all of the governed. And so these young people were basically saying, we believe in the idea of America. Even with all of the hypocrisy that has taken place, all of the discordances between our highest beliefs and our actual practice, we believe in the idea of America and where we're going. And we've become, I think, the greatest multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious constitutional democracy in the history of Earth. That's who we are. And they were standing up for that idea. So I said to Tabitha, your generation is not snowflakes. You guys have gotten beyond the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, the anti-Semitism, everything that the neo-Nazis were rallying for in Charlottesville. You knew that that's not who we are as a people. And if there are champions of the alt-right who think that America is going to do a U-turn and go back to that, as seductive a vision as that is, for some people, they really don't know who we are as a people. So I said, we need you here. We need to keep moving America in the right direction. We've got so much to be proud of here. And I'll tell you about my time in Congress over the last 10 months. It seems like the last 10 years. But in the last 10 months, people stop me and they say, it must be terrible, you must be exhausted, and so on. I say, I get to wake up every single day and go and fight for everything that I believe in. Because everything that I believe in is under attack. It really is. I mean, the Constitution is under attack. The Bill of Rights is under attack. The First Amendment is under attack. Social Security is under attack. Medicare and Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, you name it, it's under attack in America today. And I think that there's an attempt to deny the trajectory of our constitutional development, in our political development. I mean, we began not as a one-person, one-vote democracy. We began as a slave republic of white male property owners over the age of 21. But we have opened America up. You can read our Constitution as the record of our expanding democratic values. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. The 14th Amendment says equal protection and due process. The 15th Amendment says no discrimination in voting based on race. The 17th Amendment shifts the mode of election of U.S. senators from the state legislatures to the people. The 19th Amendment gives us women's suffrage. The 23rd Amendment says people in Washington, D.C. can participate in presidential elections. The 24th Amendment abolishes poll taxes. The 26th Amendment lowers the voting age to 18 to bring young people into it. Like that's a magnificent trajectory that we're on. And yet we're presented now with so much chaos in the country, where everything is being put up for grabs. But I want to say, and I'm trying to be careful not to be too partisan, in a very partisan time, in a polarized time, and I know I'm in a holy place, in a sacred place. But when I think about this period we're in, and I'm trying to keep a journal, because I do think that generations to come will scarcely believe that such a time ever existed in our country. But when I think about it, it began not on January 20th with the inaugural address about American carnage and the gloom and doom. The only inaugural address I can find in our lifetime that did not mention the Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson, Hamilton, Madison, Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, nothing about American history. It was completely blotted from view. But this period did not begin on that day. It began on the next day, January 21st, with the Great Women's March on Washington, which to me was one of the great moments in my life to be part of that, because it was a moment when the first three words of the Constitution came alive. We the people. We the people. The original democratic philosophers, Rousseau and John Locke, and they distinguished between sovereignty and government. Sovereignty was where the power resides originally. Government is just the offices that are set up by the people in order to implement the popular will, if you're in a democracy. If you're in a monarchy, sovereignty resides with the king. But in a democracy, sovereignty resides with the people. Then the people set government up. But those of us who aspire and attain to public office are nothing but the servants of the people, the servants of the popular will through the offices of the government, whether it's the executive branch, the legislative branch, or the judicial branch. And so the Women's March was an extraordinary moment, not just in Washington, but across the country, where the people reasserted public sovereignty over government. And that, to me, has been the saving grace of the period that we're in, that the people at every turn have stood up. I've been to all the marches. I don't know how many of you guys went to the Women's March and the Science March and the Climate March and the airport protests. I don't even like going to the airport to get on an airplane, but I went to the airport protests with tens of thousands of other people. And the marches recently for the Dreamers. And, and this also I would tell Tabitha, think about the Dreamers brought to America in second grade or when they're 2 years old, 800,000 of them across the country. Now their future radically uncertain, thrown into doubt. Working everywhere, in the military, in public education, in the hospitals, in colleges, graduate schools, all over the place. And the remarkable thing to me is, despite so much of the anti-immigrant fervor in the country at this moment, and we do go through these cycles of either loving the immigrants or hating the immigrants, and we're in a downturn here, but despite all of that, the polls show that 75% of the American people favor the dreamers, don't want to deport them, want to give them a chance here in America to achieve legal status and eventually citizenship. And I'm thinking about, well, why is that the case, that 3/4 of the people want to embrace the dreamers? And I think that at a time of such corrosion of our civil discourse and such primitive impulses unleashed in the country, the dreamers of all people embody for us what America is about. It's what Tom Paine called a haven of refuge for people fleeing religious and political repression from all over the world. That's who we are. That's how we were created. And so I want to end with that thought that the dreamers epitomize what we are: a land of freedom, a land of opportunity, a land of inclusion. Obviously, a turbulent and rowdy place with, openness and boundlessness. That's what people love about America. It's where the ambitious people come from all over the world because you can make something of yourself here. We've got to remember that dream. The dreamers embody a dream that all of our families have had, that brought all of us here in the first place. So I think it's been a tough time, but we're going to get through it. We're going to be stronger than ever we were before because the people have gotten so engaged and so aroused. In my district, we've got, I think, 17 groups that didn't exist before, indivisible groups and groups that are organizing people, and they're strong. They're tough, and there's hundreds and hundreds of people who are active now. So I have repaired a lot to the founders of the country, and I love the founding period. And so I will close my opening remarks. We're going to have a discussion with just a passage that I love from Tom Paine, who wrote during the American Revolution, and I'm going to update his language a little bit just for modern sensibilities, so it doesn't offend anybody. But he said that these are the times that try the souls of men and women. These are the times that try the souls of men and women. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink from the service of their cause and their country at this moment. But everyone who stands with us now will win the love and the favor and affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation: the more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end is our victory. So I think we're going to make it through, and I thank you guys for entertaining my opening thoughts this morning. So, great.
Maybe we can go for
Great. Thank you.
You want to sit on the right? Left, I mean. Thank you so much for that thought-provoking opening. And in the interest of time and to turn it over to you, I'm just going to ask one question. You talked about the fact that the people are aroused and the people are reacting. But the issue for me seems to be that we aren't really the people right now. We're several peoples. And it's precisely in the exploitation of those divisions, as opposed to an effort to close gaps, that we're seeing the greatest threat to our institutions and our way of life, even our sanity sometimes.
Yeah.
And we are in a sacred space. We're in a church, and we feel as people of faith that we're called to help. We're called to do something. What do you see as the role that faith communities can play in reestablishing what you call the moral center that you want to be in in America? What is it? How can we help?
So, well, let me just say one political thing and then one thing about ethics and morality. The political thing is that when I talked about the trajectory of our constitutional development, we have become a more democratic country, like when we went from state legislatures appointing U.S. senators to the people electing senators. But we're not there yet. Our electoral college system today operates as an anti-majoritarian institution. 2 of our last 5 elections were won by the popular vote loser by fairly dramatic margins. In the last election, it was more than 3 million votes. Similarly, in the U.S. House of Representatives, the popular will is constantly thwarted by virtue of gerrymandering of our congressional elections. That's a very serious problem. When people say to me, doesn't this whole period demonstrate the flaws or the futility of democracy? I say, not at all. You go back to FDR, who said that there are no problems that democracy has that more democracy won't cure. And I believe that if we move to real popular vote of elections, and I did introduce that in Maryland when I was a state senator, we became the first state to adopt the National Popular Vote Compact, which now a dozen states are part of in the District of Columbia. We're more than halfway there. If we can get there, I think that's going to be a critical ingredient in getting through it. And also, if the Supreme Court rises to the occasion and strikes down the gerrymandering of our congressional districts and requires us to have much more proportional representation in the way we're electing Congress. So that's the first point. But on the second point, I think that the churches and the synagogues and the mosques are going to play a critical role in getting us through this period. I do think that these are communities that don't speak in an overly partisan way. It's not just about winning the next election, but
it's about people, how it affects the lives of people.
Yeah, and so I would just say that we need the faith communities to be engaged, and and perhaps the one thing that brings all of them together is the problem of climate change, which I wouldn't even discuss as an issue, because it's not an issue, it's the entire context within which we've got to decide everything that we're doing, whether it's foreign policy or military policy or housing or infrastructure. And it's a very, it's a crisis. We've got millions of Americans today who are without water, who are without access to power. We've got forest fires out of control in California, and that is the moral urgency of our time, and we're not together on it, and we need the faith communities to bring us together. I'll just tell you one little story. One of my colleagues, who's across the aisle from me, but I try to hang out with my Republican colleagues as much as possible, but I said to him, we can disagree about taxes, we can disagree about abortion, what have you, but on climate change, we really need to bring the country together. And he said, well, you got your scientists, we got our scientists, and I said that's not really how science works,
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, there's this people and that people, right?
But I think that people can come to understand that, and he said to me, and I'm thinking about it because there's a religious dimension of the story. He said, well, I took him to all the websites of the NSA and the CIA and the DOD, and I said everybody is dealing with, the professional scientists are dealing with climate change as a real problem. Now, it's here, it's all around us. And he said, I'll just tell you one thing about that. I don't want to get a big fight with you, but he said, professionals built the Titanic, amateurs built Noah's Ark, okay? And I was a little taken aback by that.
That ended well.
And I said, does that mean you want an amateur flying your airplane to Texas this weekend? Do you want an amateur performing heart surgery? And I said, but the real thing is that I don't think that the Titanic, that disaster was caused by a design error. That was hubris, which caused the Titanic to go down. And so, but anyway, that's why we need the faith communities involved.
Any specific thoughts on what faith communities can do, concretely and tangibly?
Well,
from your perspective up there.
I don't know enough about what's going on here, but I think that it would be great to have an ecumenical interfaith movement to deal with climate change and to say it's a moral emergency. I mean, we got climate refugees in the United States of America now. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are people, there's going to be millions of people fleeing the areas that are engulfed by, rising coastal waters and the loss of islands. Right. And, we talked to Mary Landrieu from Louisiana. She said, the only thing that really worked for us after Hurricane Katrina was hundreds of thousands of people leaving and going to Houston or going to Baton Rouge or getting out. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to have to leave Puerto Rico for any real reconstruction effort to take place there? And are we going to open our communities and our arms to them? Or, are we going to build a wall? And, we thought we had a deal on the DREAM Act and without a wall, and they came back and said that they want a wall, which to me is a 14th century answer to a 21st century problem. And we're not going to have a wall, and we're not going to have moats and alligators, and that's not going to work for us.
Well, I'd like to give people in the audience a chance to ask you some questions too. So, questions and
just a couple reminders in terms of questions. Please speak into the mic and raise your hand. We only have one mic, so Steve Volkers and I will be running around trying to get them to you. And please introduce yourself as well when you before you ask the question.
Hi, welcome. My name is Thomas Russell. Will you tell us how you plan to vote on the bill that's known as H.R. 1697? In the Senate, it's known as S-720. It's called the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. This proposed legislation, for some of you that may not know, is being pushed by the Israel lobby. It would include penalties for simply requesting information or just free speech about boycotting Israel or one's opinions about Israel. Violations of the act would be subject to penalties of up to $1 million and 20 years in federal prison. The ACLU has opined on this, and they've issued a letter, and you've probably seen it, simply stated, and it is pretty simple legal language, that it violates the First Amendment. So I was wondering if you could comment on that and tell us how you plan to vote.
I'm completely opposed to that legislation, and I told Senator Cardin last week that I thought it was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, in a case called NAACP versus Claiborne Hardware, determined that the First Amendment includes the right to boycott whoever you want. I mean, what is a boycott? A boycott is not shopping someplace, and you have no legal obligation to shop any place, and then telling people you're not going to shop there and encouraging them not to shop there or not to patronize. And so it seems very clear to me that the government cannot forbid, either through civil sanctions or criminal sanctions, the act of people participating in either a domestic boycott or international boycott. And he thought that there might be a difference in terms of domestic or international, but I don't know of any First Amendment doctrine that supports a distinction or differentiation between the right of people to opine about something domestically and the right to opine about something internationally. So at least the language that I've seen from the Senate, I'm opposed to there.
Hi, my name is Tannery, and we live in Silver Spring, and you are our representative, so thank you for all that you're doing and what you stand for, and beautiful, beautiful talk this morning. And I appreciate what you said about gerrymandering and the Electoral College, and I also wanted to hear your thoughts on special interest groups' money in electoral campaigns and how that might undermine democracy, and what you are doing and what you think needs to happen in order for that to change.
Awesome. Thank you for your kind words. And I've been an impassioned, or perhaps overly impassioned, critic of the Citizens United decision, which determined for the first time in American jurisprudence after 2 centuries that a private for-profit corporation enjoys the political rights of the people, which is just astounding. It was a standard fixture in American jurisprudence for 2 centuries that, as Chief Justice John Marshall said in the Dartmouth College versus Woodward case, he said that a corporation is an artificial entity, invisible, intangible, existing only in contemplation of law and possessing only the rights conferred upon it by the state legislatures. The corporation was on a very short leash from the beginning of our republic. And then in Citizens United, the court determined simply just through an act of will that no, corporations enjoy the political rights of the people. The CEOs have the power to write checks on the corporate treasury and put it on an unlimited basis into political campaigns. And we've seen what that has meant to our politics since 2010 when the decision was handed down. So that's a major problem. As a law professor and a state senator, I testified before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee on behalf of a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United. And that, for me, was enough to oppose the elevation of Neil Gorsuch to the court, because he had written very strongly in favor of Citizens United. So I think it's a dramatic problem. It has also opened us up to lots of foreign money pouring into our elections, being laundered through domestic corporations, and I think that ultimately that's what we're going to find out about what the Russians did during the 2016 election, is that money was channeled through domestic American corporations, which then spent it in Facebook and Twitter and so on in order to affect us. So, yeah, I consider that a very serious problem. And again, we either, Tocqueville said it in Democracy in America, either democracy is expanding and deepening, and we're perfecting it, a more perfect union, or we're going to be lapsing back into autocratic forms of government.
Where are we today?
I think that we're in a struggle. We're in the fight of our lives, basically. And you know what? It's not just Maryland we're fighting for, or the United States. It's really all over the world. I mean, when I talk to people from other countries, they are facing the exact same struggle between authoritarianism and liberal democracy. And liberal democracy is hard because, everybody gets to talk, and there are interest groups, and people are, fighting about stuff. Like, that's what's great about democracy. Everybody gets to express themselves. But authoritarianism, Putin in Russia, or Orban in Hungary, or Duterte in the Philippines, or the government of Saudi Arabia, they present order and they present control, right? And I mean, let's face it, we've got tens of millions of people in our country who are drawn to more authoritarian models for doing stuff. So this is a struggle for the future of liberal democracy that's going on all over the world today.
So, hi. First of all, I'd like to thank you, as always, for speaking out so strongly about climate change. My goal is to get everybody running for office making that a primary issue. But that's not what my question is about. So you have a very clever workaround for the Electoral College. I'm not sure that we're going to get there because there are so many red states. And the thing I've been thinking about lately is I was watching the election in Montana, where Montana has 2 senators and 1 representative. And all 3 of those people are representing fewer people than you are, probably. And we're going to have, it seems to me that we're going to have a Republican Senate for the rest of my life as a result, because we're self-selecting. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts about that, and if there's any clever workaround.
Yeah. And God, I could talk for the next 3 hours about these questions, Betsy. But let me just say quickly, I addressed the GW Democrats the other day, and they said, well, we're feeling desperate. What can we do? And I said, I'll give you the advice I give the kids in soccer. Don't bunch, okay? Not everybody needs to live in DuPont Circle and Shaw. Go to North Dakota, go to South Carolina, take your 20 best friends and go and make some change around the country. You don't need to cluster geographically if this means more to you than anything else. But let me just quickly say about NPV and then the Senate. On the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact works like this. It's an interstate agreement where the state legislatures agree to appoint their electors not for the winner in our states, but for the winner in the national election once we have states equal to 270 electors that have joined the coalition. In that way, the national popular vote would be operative in every election. Don't be despairing, because we have 165 electors in our coalition. We only need 105 more, 270. We are more than halfway there. California has joined it, and New York has joined it, and Illinois has joined it, and Maryland has joined it, and so on. Yeah, it is blue states. This is true. But you know who was on our side on this? President Trump repeatedly has called the Electoral College, the way it works, a farce, a travesty, a tragedy. Now, after the election, it's true, he modulated his tones a little bit. But he took a very strong position in the 2012 election that we should have a national popular vote. And as recently as, I think, 2 weeks ago, said we really should be having a popular vote. So the public opinion polls showed that it goes across the spectrum. 70% of the American people think we should elect the president the way we elect senators and governors and mayors. Whoever gets the most votes wins. You know, the point, though, you make about the U.S. Senate is true. That's the one thing that might not be changeable even by the Constitution. I don't know. It's an interesting M.C. Escher-like question, because there's a provision in the Constitution which says that no state shall be denied its equal suffrage in the Senate. And so it's not clear we could even necessarily amend that. In any event, I think that's the last undemocratic feature that's going to go. I think we can deal with the Electoral College, which Jefferson was complaining about in his time, saying it was an ink blot on the Constitution. But there was really nothing that could be done because the right to vote didn't exist. It was totally up to the states to decide who was going to be able to vote in the states. So, yeah, we might just have to live with that one for a while.
Good morning. My name's Jeff Sharp. I'd like to ask you a question about tax policy, if I can.
Yes.
So last week we had a very interesting talk from a gentleman called Richard Reeves at Brookings. He's come out with a book recently where he makes the point that progressive but well-to-do places like Montgomery County benefit from some very regressive components in the tax code. The two examples he gave were the mortgage interest deduction and the deduction that's available for 529 plans for saving for higher education. So, you know, wonderful things perhaps in their face, but the recipients primarily of those benefits are the well-to-do in the United States. So, as a progressive, I was wondering what your thoughts are on those components of the tax code, and if you don't like them, how you would reform them. Thanks.
Okay, so I just read a really interesting book about the tax system by T.R. Reid from the Washington Post called A Fine Mess, which I found to be illuminating. And I'm not familiar with the work of Richard Reeves, but I'll be sure to check it out. Look, our tax system is riddled with allowances, deductions, exclusions, and so on. They can go on and on and on. And some of them operate in a more progressive or more regressive or what have you way. And if we could actually get rid of all of them, okay, then that would make some sense to me. But like, take another one which people say favors Maryland and Montgomery County, the state and local tax deduction, okay? Well, I'm going to fight to defend that as long as we have tax deductions and loopholes and so on, because we actually invest in our schools and we invest in our communities. And no, that would not be the first one that I would get rid of. If we're going to do real tax reform and get rid of them all, I can swallow hard and support that and say, well, let's just go generally to taxes. But I'm not going to vote to repeal this or that deduction, which actually benefits us. My family, we lived in France for a year, okay? And in France, like in most of the Western European countries, you don't get anti-tax politics in an election. It was a really interesting thing for me to see when I was over there. Because here, it seems like that's one of the organizing principles of our elections. People campaign against taxes. But they don't do that in Western Europe. And I began to ask the question, well, why not? How come we don't see that in those countries? Well, what are the things that lead people to an anti-tax politics in America? It's economic stress, financial stress in their own lives. And there are things that stress Americans out. One is paying for college for the kids because it's gotten so expensive. One is healthcare, okay? And one is retirement. But if you go to the European societies, college is basically free or very affordable. It's like €1,000. Everybody's got healthcare. And there is a generous retirement plan that everybody's going to retire on. So people feel like the big economic drains on them that we experience here in America are taken care of. And so they're willing to pay higher taxes, much higher taxes. The whole thing about how we pay the highest taxes in the world, that's fake news. I mean, that's just not, it's not even remotely true, right? So if we were to say, let's go to universal health care, let's figure out a way to get to debt-free college, let's make sure that Social Security is covering the real needs of the people, I don't think we would get that kind of really, nasty anti-tax politics. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer to you, because it doesn't go to this or that particular, exclusion or allowance. I certainly would not start with the ones that are in the current tax plan to get rid of, like the estate tax or the alternative minimum tax, which is the only reason that a lot of the top 0.5% of taxpayers pay anything, is because they have the alternative minimum tax, because there are so many deductions and allowances and so on. So I would like to see a real tax reform plan, but what was billed as a tax reform plan has simply become a tax cut, and I think in a really regressive way. So I can't support what I've seen so far.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Congressman, for coming. My name is Knut Rostad. I'll be full disclosure. I'm with you about 2/3 of the time, fantastically. And I have one anecdote and then one quick question.
Please.
My daughter graduated from Tulane this spring, and she feels about the president the way the vast majority of people, myself included, do. But when I asked her about it, her anecdote was, I was at a friend's house here in Bethesda, probably maybe even a Republican household. There are a few of them. But her observation was, sometimes we watched one cable news channel, another time we watched another cable news channel, and you know what, Dad? They don't even speak the same language. They are just worlds apart. So I think about that, and then think about your point about immigration. My question is, Bill Galston has written about this, as I'm sure you know, about the middle ground in terms of immigration, in terms of policy, and as I see it, or as I understand it, it's taking a little bit from both sides. My question to you is, is that an example that we actually could find
Yes.
middle ground that is publicly supported? Because as you know, there are parts of what he's talking about that maybe a lot of people in this room wouldn't be crazy about.
Yes.
For example. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
But 100%. Immigration has been a field where there's been lots of bipartisan consensus historically. Again, I think we've got a bipartisan consensus even on the Dreamers today. I'll give you another example, which I hope supports your point about gun safety. Our Second Amendment guarantees people the right to a handgun in self-defense and to the use of rifles for hunting and recreation. The Supreme Court said it in the Heller decision in 2008. But it doesn't guarantee anybody a right to a semi-automatic assault weapon. You don't need that for self-defense or for hunting. Nor does it give anybody who's dangerously unstable or a felon the right to access a firearm. And Justice Rehnquist said it himself in the decision. Scalia said it in the decision. There's a huge common ground there. So why are we in a situation where a madman takes semi-automatic weapons, kills 59 people, wounds 500 other people, permanently altering the lives of these families, devastating the lives of these families, and we can't do anything? Anything. We're totally riven and driven apart about it, when I think there's a total common sense gun safety agenda. Now, we implemented that agenda in Maryland after the Newtown massacre, where you recall 20 first grade school children were assassinated at point blank range with a semi-automatic assault weapon, and 6 adults were killed. We passed a ban on high capacity magazines, on the assault weapons. We have frequent unannounced inspections of the gun dealers in the state. We basically did the common sense things that they're not going to make us like Canada or the UK, where they have 125 homicides a year. We're not going to have that because we have hundreds of millions of guns in the country. But at least we can eliminate the most extreme, appalling, obscene features of the gun violence that we've grown to accustomed to, that make a lot of the world now regard us as some kind of pariah country. We can find that common sense middle ground agenda but we can't allow ourselves to be driven apart by people who want to do it simply for electoral reasons. There's a great book you got to check out by Adam Winkler called Gunfight about the history of the NRA. And the NRA used to be, when I was a kid, common sense. For gun safety, it was all about marksmanship. You got the NRA badge, on your jacket, and they wanted responsible gun ownership. And now they oppose everything, because for them you're on the slippery slope to confiscation of guns. But that's why the Supreme Court did us a favor, because we can't confiscate guns. The Second Amendment means there's an individual right to ownership within those categories.
Time
Maybe
for
one more question. Thank you. Last question.
You spoke about, I'm Julia Andrews, you spoke about gerrymandering earlier, and if the Supreme Court were to fail us, I have, like sisters getting a referendum in Michigan and somebody else, my other sister, trying in Pennsylvania to very little avail.
Right.
Is it going to be a state-by-state battle to end gerrymandering?
So far, it's been a state-by-state battle, either in state courts under the state constitution or with state legislative pushes, or in states that have initiative. We don't have initiative, but in the western states where they have initiatives like California. I got to say, now that you got to invite me back to talk about this, because this is a 2-hour discussion, not a 2-minute discussion. But I got to say, even in California, where they've gone to an independent redistricting commission, the districts don't look so funny anymore. They're much more compact and so on, but it's still very lopsided. The Democrats actually dramatically expanded their presence in the congressional delegation. It's still very lopsided. Because the problem, and this is the part I would need to explain, is not just the gerrymandering, that's part of it, but it's single-member districts themselves. And one way to think about it is, if you've got a state that's like 55% Democrat, Republican, or Republican, Democrat, if you spread that population out evenly around the districts, 100% of the delegation is going to be Democrat, or 100% of the delegation is going to be Republican. We've got, I think, 19 states where Massachusetts, it's all Democrat. They got a Republican governor. I mean, I'm a Democrat, but I don't like that. I think the Republicans have to have representation. Utah, the entire congressional delegation is Republican, and they've got a Democratic mayor in Salt Lake City, and 43% of the people are Democrats. It doesn't make sense. We need to move to multi-member districts. So the legislation I have, which could work with Representative Beyer from Virginia, is for independent redistricting commissions in every state to draw multi-member districts, so you would have Republicans elected in Massachusetts, Democrats elected in Utah, and much greater diversity of representation and much fuller representation of all the people.
And hopefully better discourse.
And better discourse, well actually, and better discourse is a key part of it, because if you've got a multi-member district and you've got ranked choice voting, you rank all of the candidates. Say there's 5 people running in my multi-member district, I rank them 1 through 10. Everybody who's on the ballot. Now it's no longer a political incentive to destroy and character assassinate the other candidates, but to say, oh, I understand, Ann's your first choice, but I'd love to be your second choice or your third choice, and here's what, how I think we can work together. And we're not that far from that in Maryland in terms of our state legislative elections with 3 delegates and 1 senator, which is the way we do it. We're pretty close to getting there, and we get much fuller representation. We get a lot more women elected to office when you move away from the single-member districts, and we can show that in political science terms. It's dramatic the way that diversity is enhanced by doing it. So, I think we got to open ourselves up to the political design of countries around the world. We're the oldest democracy in the world, but we're still stuck in the past in some ways, and we got to keep moving forward.
Thank you so much for that. And I took your earlier comment that you would like to discuss further as a suggestion we might invite you back.
Please, I would love to come back anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.